Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Perception Paradox. My name is Julija, and we are here today for another episode of some nice content. And today my guest is Julija JJ from Black Unicorn PR. And yeah, she is always somewhere in the startup scene buzzing. You can find her behind the scenes, you can find her on the stage, you can find her in the halls of the startup conferences. And we met through shared friends and in general through startup ecosystem. We kept bumping into each other. Our small talks kind of extended into more meaningful and deeper conversations. And here we are. Today we are having an episode on Perception Paradox about Julia's career in PR and how did she get on this road, and as well overall about PR industry as such, and in the startup scene, and what founders should know and what are the common misconceptions. So yeah, this episode is for you if you're pursuing your career in PR, and if you're a founder who is trying to do some PR, trying to find agency to work with, or understand better what's the role of PR and what kind of value it can create. So let's dive in and enjoy. Real people, real stories, and real challenges that break the status quo. I'm your host, Julija, and welcome to Perception Paradox. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Perception Paradox, and today's guest is Julija, or JJ, who is the founder and CEO of Black Unicorn PR. I know it's a pretty cool name, and Black Unicorn PR is a boutique agency helping European tech startups build powerful media presence. And with over a decade of international PR experience and a background working with brands like TomTom and VISA, JJ now focuses on empowering startups in fintech, deep tech, and beyond. And she's also a very known speaker, mentor, and all-around PR powerhouse. So, JJ, welcome to Perception Paradox.
Thank you so much for having me, Julija. It's a pleasure. You made me sound much fancier than I actually am. So I appreciate that.
I'm glad to hear. No, but that's the impression and perception I have about you. We always keep meeting in all those events, and I always find you in a very dynamic, different role, which is maybe not different. It's all about the same, right? Startups, PR, but anywhere I go, we would always bump into each other, even for a few seconds, but it's really always so much fun.
Yeah, I don't think we ever had a cup of coffee like sitting down in one place. It's normally, yeah, as you said, we see each other in random, or not so random, naturally, events just passing by. Yeah.
In some corners and then laying in the corner, talking about
You have
life.
2 more minutes.
Two more minutes. Tell me, what's happened? We haven't seen each other for 2 months, so?
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh, that's actually where I want to think about that. But I'm glad that we do have now the space to actually talk, to dive a bit more deeper, both from the professional and personal side, because of course they both go hand in hand, especially if you're in the startup world. And I think would be a great start from your early beginnings. Am I right that you pursued your career as an investigative journalist?
Well, kind of. So I was born and bred in Lithuania, right? And I lived up until I finished school, and then it just made sense to go to the UK to study journalism. And the reason why I decided to study journalism is that probably at the age of 14, 15, my teacher said that I'm really good at writing. And I started thinking about the options that I have, and journalism seemed to be the only feasible option, I didn't want to become a writer. I don't think I have the imagination, to write like loads of books. So yeah, I went to the UK because obviously in the UK, everyone knows like the BBC, Financial Times, all of those kind of massive, extremely well-established media outlets. And I was like, I want to be one of you guys. I want to be on BBC. I want to be a, BBC TV presenter. And that's how it started. But yeah, as soon as I arrived in the UK, that was 11th of September 2009, so going on 16 years right now, I've realized that most of pretty much everyone in my course who was doing journalism were Brits, because you naturally need to have the language skills
Mm-hmm.
and, articulate yourself properly. And also I was studying in Bristol, so the accent was a little bit tricky for me. So for the first half a year, I swear to God, I was calling my mom crying every day, saying, just like, can I please come back? Like I just don't think I can do that. Because even though I went to like an English kindergarten in Lithuania when I was like 2, I thought like I know English perfectly. But yeah, that was a nice reality check where I had to have like a little dictaphone at the time, record my lectures, go back to my dorms, re-listen to the lectures, and then understand, kind of make sense of what it was. And fast forward 16 years, I write and I talk for a living. So there you
That's
go.
amazing. That's very
Yeah.
inspiring. So that dictaphone and resilient approach towards your kind of direction paid off. Where did you get this resilience and what made you not to give up?
I don't think failure was an option, funny enough. Obviously, I came from a small country, right? There was like 3 million people now. It's less living in Lithuania. And it did feel that you have to prove yourself maybe a little bit more compared to, let's say, the Brits that live there. And I don't know, somehow I just never thought that I can't do something. For me, it was just like, you put enough effort, you put enough time, you put enough work in, and they just kind of persevere. And, like that's how I got one of my first internships. I was genuinely stalking, the people in an agency, saying like, I think I can do this. I really want it. I think I can do this. Yeah. And in the end, they gave me, an internship, sent me to London for a couple of weeks. Yeah. And once again, I am still in the same industry, in the same business all these years later. So failure was not an option, which if you think about it, failure should be an option, right? Because you can
Mm-hmm.
just have this mentality that you need to do something, even though if you don't really want to do something. But I also think I always had a fantastic support network, within my family, within my friends. So even probably when I was failing at certain things, it just didn't feel like failure. So one
Mm.
of the biggest things, and I don't think I've ever spoken about it on a podcast, just with the, like private circles. So after the UK, I went to study masters in Amsterdam, because it was relatively cheap. Amsterdam seemed to be like a great place to hang out in. And also my degree was like one of the best regarded in Europe. And I absolutely despised it. I hate it so much. I just can't even tell you. And then it was kind of a weird moment because you think, okay, so I'm already here. I'm studying. On one hand, I should be able to kind of put myself through all of this pain and kind of push through and get my degree, because this is what everyone expects you. And I don't know who was expecting anything of me, because no one was telling me that I have to do my master's,
Mm-hmm.
but it just felt like after your bachelor's you go and you do your master's, then I don't know, you find a husband, give birth to a child, and walk into the sunset, right? And on the other hand, I was like, I'm not sure, why would I do something that I really don't want to do? And like, why am I putting myself through all this kind of mental pain? Because I started seeing a psychiatrist at the age of like 22, because I was
Mm.
a little bit, I don't get it. Like, do I need to do this because this is what I expect of myself? Because I think someone, some neighbors or ex-classmates would think like something bad of me? Or do I just say, whatever, can't go through with this, don't really need this master's degree, it will not really define me? And I went with the second option. I think I had like maybe 4 months left to finish my degree, but it was just so horrible and I was just not adjusted well to it
Mm.
at all. I just wanted to pick up my papers, and I swear to God, this is one of the best decisions I have ever made. Having said that, recently I just finished my master's degree, right? So it took me 12 years, give or take, to decide that I want to do my master's, and I did it. So it's never too late.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's
Thank
never
you.
too late and it's always the
Never
right
too
time. I
late.
kind of resonate a lot with that as well. I had I
Yeah.
didn't go straight to my master's. I just knew that I didn't want that and the time might come. It came a few years later. But when I started doing my master's in Copenhagen, I've realized I've got dragged so much into startup scene. So it became like a
Yeah.
side project. And I literally, actually, I was doing the same. I kind of put it on hold for a bit. And then when I had a bit more time capacity, I was measuring, should I finish the thesis or not?
Exactly.
Well, and if I will be writing the thesis, so how does it actually resonate with the current life direction I'm pursuing. And if it does
Absolutely.
resonate, let's do it. And actually it did work out pretty well because I was already working on different projects and I just literally wrote my thesis about that project and gender diversity. I was like, awesome.
That works, exactly. And I think at that time, I did understand that one size really doesn't fit all. You know, like I think especially when you're young, of course, there's so many external factors that push you around, be it your family, friends, I don't know, internet, TV, your favorite superstars, whatever. You kind of try to find an example, but then you need to find your own path. And that is always so scary because you never know exactly, where that path will take you. I was also lucky that I was working in public relations already at the time in TomTom. So I just realized that my degree has nothing to do with what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis as a day job. So yeah, it was weird. It was weird, but I think it was one of the best decisions that I've made. Sometimes I think I was like really ashamed of it to a certain degree. And, for a couple of years, like, am I like not smart enough not to do something or not to finish something? But by the end of the day, I also realized that people just care about themselves anyway. Right? No one is thinking about me.
Yeah.
No one cares about me. So, why would I think what other people would think of me if I do or don't do something?
Where do you think it's coming from? Do you think it can be related to the heritage we are carrying with us? It's kind of everyone had to, quitting was not an option back then, and everyone considered it as a failure, even though it was a tough lesson to relearn, for me at least, how to embrace
Yeah.
that try on experience on life.
I think maybe it goes back to school quite often, right? When people, like when children, students are scared to ask questions because they don't want to ask stupid questions because, the rest of them will make fun of you. And children are usually just extremely evil in general, right? If you take it, because they have no filters. But as I said, I was very lucky to have a very strong support network. That, as I said, like maybe naturally, there were some failures. I just never felt that those are kind of the end of the world. And this is something that is very useful right now in business, right? So you fail, you stand up, you learn from it, you figure out what happened wrong, how can you do it better next time, and then you just move on. And if I would just be lingering on, my goodness, I've sent an email like, with a typo, this is the end of the world, this is so horrible, or if I asked a question that was maybe very obvious to some people, I'm all right.
And that's the worst, to put so much emotional pressure and to, I don't know, worry for the things that really doesn't matter. And as you said, everybody thinks about themselves at the end of the day and what's happening around us. So talking about your kind of adventurous soul and you having courage to do things that felt right for you. So what led to establishing your own business, Black Unicorn PR?
Yeah, I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. Never wanted to have my own business. Every single time I have to say like, oh, I'm a business owner, that feels a little bit funny. When I write that JJ, founder and CEO, it just sounds so hilarious, like CEO. Yeah, it feels very fake adult somehow. Yeah, but it was quite interesting because I've started naturally failed as a journalist for multiple reasons, and then decided to work in public relations, started working with big companies, then moved on to startups when everyone in London became like an entrepreneur, the next, Steve Jobs. So that was a really, really good time to kind of tap into the market because startups just started kind of raising, more than ever before. And then I was working at a very cool sustainability startup in London. I was heading their public relations department. Was there for a couple of years. And the problem, I think, sometimes when you work in-house is that the messaging doesn't change that much, or at least it didn't change at the time, when it was 2014, 2015. And I thought, okay, so one of the problems we had at the startup is trying to find an agency that could cater to us, both in terms of finances, because as a startup, you don't have, loads of budget just to spend. And secondly, in terms of exactly what works for a startup, because what works well for a startup will never work well, for a big established corporate. It's a totally different ball game, it's different rules. So I've decided that I'll be a freelancer maybe, because people were freelancing and I was like, sure, I'll just do that. I went to Bali, for a couple of months. I tried to do this eat, pray, love. I was walking in the rain, just trying to think, that's exactly probably how it felt. Didn't really get the experience or some sort of, eureka moment that I was expecting. But once
So
again,
no
probably
book as an outcome?
no book as an outcome, no kind of romantic partner on the way, something. Because my partner was waiting, back in the UK. But it was just so funny because you watch so many movies and then all of a sudden you do it and you feel like, okay, so you're walking in the rain and you're like very, I don't know, sad or very excited. You don't know what's waiting for you in your life. And then you just keep on walking and you just sweat. So, there's nothing massive. And once I came back, what happened is I've just, as I said, went freelance. And there were a couple of people that knew that I went freelance, started, asking for my advice, for my services. And then at some point, I think maybe like 3 months in, I've realized that I can't really cope with the demand because, there's only one of me and there's just so many other people that wanted to work with me at the time. And also I'm entrepreneurial right now, all these like 7-8 years later. But at the time I was like, I just know how to do PR. I don't know how to do accounting. I don't know how to do finances. I'm not sure exactly, what I'm doing. So my co-founder, he had a very cushy corporate job. And I was like, how about you leave your wonderful job and join me on this, God knows where it will take us venture. It's amazing. We might get paid, we may not get paid, who knows? But he is very, like, he's a genius. Probably if he's going to be listening to this, he'll be like, yeah. But, he's extremely, extremely smart and he is extremely focused and like very organized. So he is the guy, who's into Excel and like spreadsheets and this and that. And we have files for every file and he's very organized. I am more of I bring chaos, but like a very good chaos, but it's still chaos, right? So I just come in, I do things, I say things, and then I just leave. And he's the one who's like, okay, so now we need to put this in this folder, this in that folder, etc. So I come from like a very PR creative side of things, and he comes from more like, okay, so this is a client, this is the crazy idea, this is the end task, just let's make sure that we actually get there. And it worked beautifully in a sense that we support and complement each other in like very good ways, because a lot of people ask, well, how does it feel to have a co-founder? I was like, it feels great because we are in charge of very different sides of the business, but then we also align on the same things quite naturally. Of course, we clash, we have our differences, but by the end of the day, if he decides to do something that is within his realm, I'll be like, sure, just, go with it. And same with him and with me, yeah.
That's really great. It's pretty difficult to find a co-founder, especially I think find it nowadays. It's kind of so much chaos and people not knowing what they want to build, what they want to do, getting lost in the angle of strengths as well, or where to put the focus, and then clashing when they come under working under the same company because you two both do the same thing. But the problem you're tackling, you don't need two people actually tackling that.
You don't, exactly. And I think when it comes to finding co-founders, so first and foremost is trust, right? I trust Mauro with my life, and naturally I trust him with any of the clients or, whatever that else needs to be tackling. So that's one thing. And second thing is, as you very fairly mentioned, that you do get sometimes people with egos or, people with the same skill set trying to solve the same problem when probably you need to have two different people with different skill sets in order to tackle that problem. So, within our company, any sort of kind of public engagement, speaking, on stage, I'm in charge of that. Mauro is, once again, he's more of a, just like sure we streamline the processes to make the most of it. And running, exactly. And, like, for example, and I could not do that, right? So he goes on those, VC runs during events like at 7 a.m. No, not happening. That is his part of the job. At 7, I'm probably still dreaming. And and it's just very important. Also, I think once you divide the job in, like, I don't know how many people that might be involved, you have to be able to get to trust them that they do the job well, and kind of let it go and just not be a control freak. And secondly, actually, just to also accept that you don't know everything, right? When I was in my 20s, I was like, yeah, of course I know everything. I know everything so well. And now, we have such a fantastic team, and I do ask advice within our team because I don't know everything. I would love to probably know everything, but there's just so many things. We live in this age of constant flow of information and working in public relations. As we were talking before we jumped on pod, there's always news. My Slack is always pinging. My emails, I don't know how many emails are right now. Like there's something on LinkedIn, there's something on Facebook, on Instagram, there's something happening in the world. There's Trump saying stupid shit that probably affects somehow, the things that we do.
Yeah.
And you're just continuously surrounded by that. So keeping up with everything is getting harder than ever.
How do you do that? Do you use some kind of tools, or how do you manage now to follow the news? Because we're not talking about the overload of the news, and a very, very weird political environment currently in the world. And then we do have so much misinformation, disinformation that being thrown with all the AI and the manipulations. So how did it actually affect now your work, and how are you coping with it?
It's interesting, and it's somewhat tricky. So I think if you are now just getting into the business, it's a little bit trickier than when, let's say, you were doing the same thing for like 10, 15, 20, 30 years, right? Because you are used to different types of filtering, I guess, even within your head. Now, of course, with AI, there's just so many ridiculous things happening. I think quite recently there was an article that came out saying that someone, apparently an expert, was quoted in very reputable media outlets and very reputable publications. And when they actually tried to find that person did not either exist, or that person is just like very, like low key, which is unusual nowadays. No one is low key unless you have a reason to be low key. So, and those things happen. And sometimes you think, okay, so even journalists sometimes just don't pick up on that because they get so much information. How does a person that is just reading the news can tell apart, whether it was a fake story or not? Last year, funny enough, we have encountered something that was absolutely crazy. So our client, an Estonian client, got in touch with us saying, hey guys, so we saw someone just launched a website, which is literally just a stripped down version of our client's website with just a different logo, but like all the information is pretty much the same. And we're like, well, this is unusual, right? And this is not, if you're trying to scam someone or fake someone, just make sure that, you do it well. So we went on that website, and it was actually a copy paste of our client's website. And we were like, okay, so this is weird. So then what we started doing was started digging and see what kind of news was surrounding it. And apparently the news was that this startup has received the kind of, I don't know, a couple of million by this fund. And I was like, we know a lot of VC funds, but never heard about this fund. This is a little bit tricky and what's happening. And long story short, once again, Mauro, who is very much into research operations stuff, he did an extreme digging and he found out that VC fund doesn't exist, that the startup doesn't exist, and it was just done, as a scam exercise, I guess. The worst thing out of it is that a lot of publications, and I think maybe it was Wall Street Journal, one of the other ones, they didn't write the full piece, but they actually had a little mention of that startup being invested in by that particular fund. And I remember that he was jumping on a call with them and actually, explaining through the process exactly what happened and how we understood that this was like a massive scam, etc. Wow. So, and it happens like more than ever right now because it's so easy to replicate a website, just have like a different domain. It's so easy to start producing content that is like really not really authentic or journalistic content. So it's tricky, but let's say there are a couple of publications that I always read that I know like very high quality. So let's say the Financial Times, BBC, kind of my go-to media outlets every morning. And then in terms of the startups, Sifted, TechCrunch, Tech.eu, and a couple of others, right? I know that Lithuanians actually, and whoever is listening to, launched a really, really fabulous app called Anna. And essentially what it does, it reads the news and newsletters for you. And then you get like a digestive as to what has happened, right? And if you're into politics, if the VC funds, you kind of get all that. So yeah, and that's how you try to kind of listen to what's happening in the world. But something is always happening.
It's always every single minute, and you have to trust your sources as well. But so you've been in the industry for
too long,
for quite some time. So you have experienced all this evolution in the last decade. And let's put ourselves into the shoes of the founder. So founders, let's say, come to the conference and have experienced so many times that there is such a misconception about the role of PR. And quite a lot of especially new founders
Yeah.
think that PR is here to brag. PR is here to actually just talk about the money and
Yeah,
to sell. And there
of
are so many
course.
misconceptions. And then everyone thinks that if media is in the conference, so they are here just to basically to be bragged, to have a chance to write about that founder and what he's been doing. So could you demystify all those
Yeah.
myths and what is the current role of PR in the startup scene? And yeah, why do we
No,
approach it so
absolutely.
badly?
I think it has a really bad reputation altogether, right? So before I got into PR, the only notion of PR I had was from Samantha and Sex and the City. I didn't know exactly, you don't know exactly what she's doing. She's just having a good
Yeah.
time and, somehow earning a lot of money. So, and if you look at any other movies where you have kind of PR representatives, it's portrayed as a very glamorous and glitzy type of a job that all you do is go to parties, drink very expensive champagne, just chat to one journalist, chat to another journalist, and voila, you're on the cover of, I don't know, Forbes 30 under 30. Right? So I think culturally it was wrong. Another thing why I think we're not being taken seriously is that there are a lot of bad PR practitioners because people think it's such an easy job to do. A lot of times people think all we do is just kind of sit there now with ChatGPT, typing press releases and just force feeding them to journalists, and then journalists write about that, which is definitely, not the case. It never was. So that kind of makes us look a little bit weird, especially I think in front of people that have never been exposed to public relations. And yeah, having talked to some, let's say young entrepreneurs or first time entrepreneurs, they say like, okay, so if I end up on TechCrunch or Sifted, how many products will I sell? I was like, but the role of public relations as it is not to help you sell. Yes, to a certain degree it does help because then you compete with your competitors, you want to be seen better and as everyone else, but that does not necessarily help you with direct sales. Our job is to make sure that we help you with trust and credibility, and we're in a very kind of interesting and quite often a very difficult spot, right? So we're in the middle, PRs. Then you have the media on one side, and then you have founders, entrepreneurs on the other side. And from both sides you get hated on quite a lot, and just because the founders want to push a story that is definitely interesting only for that founder, and you have to gatekeep that information from the journalist because you don't want to ruin the relationship. And journalists sometimes they say like, okay, this is not big of a story, or I can do it in like 3 months time when it's going to be too late. So you are trying to control something that you have zero control over, because you can't control the founders and the news, what's happening with them, and you definitely can't control the journalist. The journalists owe us or founders exactly nothing, right? They don't I wanted to swear, but I won't. But they don't owe you anything. And that puts you kind of in a tricky spot, because when it comes to public relations, it usually deals with earned media, right? So you have to earn your right to be in the media, right? So you have to literally work your ass off quite a lot in order to be seen somewhere. Because as I said, journalists can write good things about you. They can also write bad things about you. If you think about all of the kind of big startups that kind of, skyrocketed very massive, like Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes, and then went crashing down, naturally the skyrocketing hype was with the help of media, but also it was the journalist from, was it the Wall Street Journal, John Carreyrou, that helped to bring it down, right? So once again, journalists can break you or make you, I guess, to a certain degree. But when you're a tiny startup and there's so many other startups that you're competing against, how do you make sure that people trust you? Because in order to buy your product or service or invest in you, people have to trust you, and you have to have this kind of layer of credibility. And that's where, journalists come in, where once again, they kind of give you this validation. And if you did end up on TechCrunch, Sifted, TechEU, you startups, whatever, it kind of gives you a nice seal of credibility. Because another way of people thinking that, let's say a founder comes to us, he says, okay, we want to work with you, he pays us X amount of money, then they think that we pay that money to TechCrunch to write about that startup, which is not the case. Like, we don't pay journalists to write. Once again, we try to craft the stories that would be interesting enough for the media to cover.
So what would you define the newsworthy?
Yeah, so you have to be, well, first of all, there has to be some sort of news, right? You have to have some sort of news. Just existing or launching a website is not news. You also have to have with that news some sort of value. So let's say defense tech is a really hot topic right now, and for all the obvious and normal reasons, right? So the war in Ukraine is ongoing. Naturally, Europe has to think about its defense in different ways. So that is news, right? And we do have a couple of defense tech clients, and it's been kind of very much of a needed topic. And also for that, you need to have thought leaders within the space. So you need people not just say like, hi, this is us and this is our drone. You do need to have someone who understands, how that drone works, why it works better than anyone else. Where exactly can you deploy it? Have you deployed it already in Ukraine? So kind of, this whole realm of what's going on. So that's kind of, news and timeliness. Also impact. If, you're not extremely topical in the sense that, let's say defense tech, or when COVID happened, a lot of health techs came around. So what impact does your startup have on, let's say, your consumers? Are you making their lives better? Are you making their lives easier? Are you just doing something that is faster and better than, let's say, a bigger competitors that you have? But then for that, you need to make sure that you have some sort of data or, research or stats to back it up with. Because, just saying like, oh, we're like 99% better than anyone else. Who told you that? And the reason I'm coming up with that example is that our former client did say on their website that they're 99% faster, I think, than the competitors. And I was like, oh, that's, this is fantastic. Let's, make sure we use it. Let's milk it. And I was like, where's the data? And they're like, oh, no, a couple of clients told us that. I was like, this is not data. You can't just put it on your website. So yeah, so timeliness, newsworthiness, impact, and naturally also in terms of geographies. So if a startup is from Lithuania, it's very likely that the first steps, in terms of public relations and media is going to be in Lithuania. And this is normal, and this is, the way it should be. When you go, let's say, and expand to France, it's very likely that the French media is going to be interested in you more than, let's say, the British or German one. But you have to understand that the German market is very different from the French market and very different from the British market, right? Even not in a sense the language, but also how journalists operate. So in the UK, journalists don't necessarily like it when you call them. In Germany, a lot of journalists do prefer when you call them. In France, you have to speak perfect French, in order to try and get places. Just bonjour, comment ça va? Vous parlez anglais? That's that will not cut it. Exactly. So you have to understand all of those intricacies and kind of cultural differences in terms of like not only the culture as a country, but also in terms of the media landscape. And let's say, also another example, what happens quite often. So if you're coming from a small market, as I mentioned, it's naturally that the local media is always going to be hyping you up and always going to be rooting for you. And this is right, this is fair, and this is how it should be. But you can't expect the same treatment in a different market, right? So if you won an award internationally, I'm pretty certain that Lithuania, some of the journalists, some of the publications will say like, this Lithuanian startup, bam, won this one fantastic, wonderful award. And this is beautiful and this is great. What you can't do is just go and write a press release that you won an award and then just try to, force feed it to the Financial Times, right? It's a different type of ball game. And I think our job quite often as PR professionals is not to be yes men or women. Right? Our job is just to be very realistic with our clients, explain to them why certain things work, why certain things don't work. And it's not always something that they want to hear. But, if we want to reach the best results and if we want to make sure that we kind of keep these relationships with media quite solid and, on like really good terms, we have to understand that we need to bring the value first.
And how does it work when it comes to crisis and when founders need to work on their reputation management? Because PR also can jump in there, right, to help. Do you have some interesting...
It can. Yeah. Try not to. But, it's funny. You can tell when someone will have a crisis depending how they act, right? So there are a couple of situations naturally when, crisis can... There's two different types of crisis. One is operational and another one is reputational. So operational, if it's your mistake somewhere, I don't know, all of a sudden your AML procedures were not in place or you didn't do something, then probably you can change that, right? Reputational, if I don't know, your CEO was accused of sexual misdemeanor or something like that. We are not within the PR kind of realm that would jump in and try to help with that particular, situation, but there's a very specific kind of niche of crisis comms professionals that just kind of, look into a variety of cases. And funny that you mentioned crisis comms, because in the last probably couple of months, we received an insane amount of inbound requests just saying that someone is trying to take someone to court, or this educational institution has been receiving like troll reviews. Like, what do we do? I was like, I don't know. We specialize in a different type of PR, so always try to refer them to someone else.
Okay. Wow, that's pretty interesting. So when it comes to the founders, when should they start thinking about the PR?
Yeah, as soon as they have an idea that they want to do something.
But how does it work, Ben? Because you also start thinking, whoa, I need a brand, but then I don't really kind of sure what I communicate. So how does it come into this whole process flow?
Yeah, you don't have to start proactively doing anything with PR activities per se. What you need to do is you need to be aware of that PR exists and communications. You need to have a very basic understanding of what you expect from PR, right? So that PR is about credibility and trust, not about, all of a sudden your inbox overflowing with multiple requests to buy your product because you ended up somewhere, right? So like very, very basic understanding. Also, PR all naturally fits into the communication. So you do need to communicate your product. You do need to communicate your journey. You do need to communicate yourself. So that's just kind of a given, right? What is your story? Because we always ask our clients, like, what was the eureka moment? How do you meet your founders? Because that's what matters. Another thing that is quite big nowadays, and obviously we're on a podcast right now, is thought leadership. So you want to become a thought leader within the space, and you can do it via different means. So, you can go on podcasts or pitch yourself to podcasts, speak at events, naturally, from small ones to big ones. And also you can start writing opinion pieces. And the media landscape has changed massively. A lot of journalists have been laid off, but media outlets still need to push out content. And I'm not just saying to push out like AI generated rubbish. Yeah. No, like genuine, interesting thoughts and opinions of founders. Perhaps that will be at a slightly later stage when someone asks us, okay, so how much money do we need to have in order to afford, let's say, PR agency? But then the question is, why do you need like PR right now? And why do you need an external agency or like someone in-house to help you out with that? Perhaps, you can do things yourself. And there's a lot of things that you can do yourself, from press hygiene to having decent photos, to trying to talk to journalists, use them as people, not as tools, or don't use them at all, right? Just once again, provide value. And then perhaps it makes sense to start PR. But also it's likely that you just want to sell the product. You don't care what people say about you. All you want to do is make some money, which is fine, right? Maybe not the right way, but it's okay. And perhaps it makes sense to invest all that money into advertising, like on Meta or Google or LinkedIn or whichever your audience is. Because by the end of the day, ending up in BBC, FT, TechCrunch, CFT, whatever you want is wonderful and lovely, but you also have to think about your audience. Is your audience reading that, right? Like, why do you want to end up in like this massive top tier publication when all of your potential clients or investors are reading this like small newsletter? Of course, it doesn't have the same name, right, that you would want to print and show it to your grandparents. But we need to remember that we're not kind of chasing egos and stroking anyone's egos, right? The business is here to do business, and PR is very much here to support with this kind of layer of credibility. And that's why, we do work within a lot of kind of high risk, I guess, sectors, so like financial services, fintech, high risk, right? Defense tech, high risk, AI or cybersecurity. So credibility there is just so important.
So then when it comes to all those Forbes 30 under 30 and so on, does it still make sense to build your reputation, or it became more like a scammy game now? Especially knowing that a lot of people got prosecuted from those lists.
I know. But did you see, I think Forbes even made like a little joke of themselves that a lot of them, like 30 under 30, who went into like jail or something. Yeah. I think, look, Forbes is a good brand. Right? It was a much better brand perhaps before. I think there's a couple of things with Forbes. So in Forbes, there are editors and there are journalists. And there's some fantastic journalists and editors and people that write incredibly good stories. Then you have a lot of contributors that are somewhat questionable, right? And I knew there were some contributors that would get paid by Forbes, and then they will also get, be charging people that are paying about. But this is a whole different, like, 5-hour conversation. So some of them can be a little bit dodgy, but not all of them are. And then you also have this kind of Forbes Council where you can try and place your articles, I think up to 12 articles per year, but also it goes for like a very rigorous process of editorial, right? It's not that you can just write any sort of rubbish. So you do have this kind of, Forbes still has really good stuff going on there. And if you do end up and, work with like really good journalists that have fantastic fintech defense tech journalists, wonderful. And, it kind of gives you a seal of approval. But naturally, the whole brand with this 30 under 30 and, everyone pretty much that ended up, all of a sudden ended up in jail, it affects it, no matter whether you want it or not. So if anyone does want to, let's say, end up on Forbes, not necessarily 30 under 30, whatever they do nowadays, always take a look at journalists and whether they're actual journalists or just, contributors, let's say.
That's a good one. And when do you think startups should consider in-house versus agency when it comes to PR?
Depends on the needs. So what I've been seeing recently, probably in the last year and a bit, so a lot of startups up to probably like Series A, they try to hire a lot of very junior PR people. Once again, going back to the misconception that PR is so easy that anyone can do it, it's not. That's why we still exist. And I think then they get burnt quite a lot because the expectations don't match the experience of the person that they've hired. So I would say, so let's say in our case, we work with a lot of kind of up to Series A companies, right? They do have, let's say, one person that is in charge of, let's say, marketing and public relations, and we are kind of an add-on to their team, right? So they'll be an extension to their team. We work, let's say, with a unicorn company. They do have their own massive PR department, and we're still kind of helping out maybe, with some other ideas. Generally, there are three options. Either you get an in-house person, either you get a freelancer, or you get an agency. And also the agency, they can be like boutique agency, they can be a massive agency, medium-sized agency, there's so many agencies for like every taste. And it's entirely up to you in terms of the budget that you have, in terms of the expectations that you have. Let's say the in-house person will know everything about you, right? They will just download all the information, but also they're going to be extremely stretched because if it's one person, they'll have to do everything from press releases to pitching to events to thought leadership. If it's a freelancer, it's very likely that freelancer is going to be focused on like one niche quite a lot, right? But then freelancers can also be somewhat expensive, like on a day rate. And then you have agencies that can be very expensive, but also you don't get one person. Usually you get like a team of 3, 4, 5, depending how big your account is. And you get kind of the expertise and also like all the databases that freelancers probably can't afford because, like 20K per year or something. Yeah. So it really, really, really depends.
And what do you define as a productive founder-agency relationship? How do you like
productive?
To work? I don't know. Like, how do you like? Do you work with everyone, or for example, someone approaches you, and how does the start of a conversation and then work look with Black Unicorn?
Yeah, so obviously there's myself and Mauro, so one of us is heavily involved in the account. In terms of how we define, there's sometimes like a chemistry thing, right? Maybe someone would like to work with Mauro more, maybe someone likes to work with me more, maybe Mauro has more accounts and he can't take on more of those accounts, so I jump in. Some of the accounts have both of us. So the most important thing for me is the chemistry meeting, right? They might be the best founders ever, and we might be the best agency that has ever existed, naturally. But when you have a conversation, you realize it's not a cultural fit. Because what we want to try and have kind of within the first call is whether we have the understanding where PR fits in and where exactly we're trying to go with that. So if it's not the right fit, if they want something else, we tend to refer them to like ads or, marketing agencies. But if it is the right fit, then, it's either myself or Mauro, then there's an account manager and a kind of executive and also a copywriter that kind of goes well with, each client. We do say that we're kind of an extension of our clients. Once again, no matter whether it's like a tiny account or if it's like a massive account, everyone gets the same love. Everyone gets the same attention. As I say, like I dislike everyone equally, so we're good. So, and it's important, right? Because it's not a transactional relationship with your, let's say, PR pros. be it us or someone else. You can't just, throw a bone and just say like, make sure that you make a massive barbecue out of it. It's very much a partnership. So we do work very closely with founders. Of course, if it's like a much later stage and the founders are very stretched for time, we work with like strategy officers or, like within the departments, but it's always a very, very close relationship. And if someone just says like, well, I'll see you like once in a blue moon, well, we can't really, expect the results. It's still a human-based relationship. AI is not going to replace me. Not happening.
Yeah, how do you balance between authenticity and overall media strategy and all this, I would say, manipulation and happening online?
Yeah, so AI is here and it's not going to be going anywhere. It feels like it's doing what internet did, all these years ago. And there were some people saying like, oh my goodness, internet will never stay and this is, whatever, no one's going to be using it. But we should not demonize it. We should try and adopt it to the works that we're doing, right? So of course, in an ideal world, AI would probably help us to do all the like kind of little tedious things, so you could focus on creativity and media strategy, etc. We don't like extremely heavily use AI. Yes, we do use it to a certain degree. I use it myself quite often, let's say, to check my grammar because English is my third language, and it's absolutely fine, right? We don't use it, let's say, to write thought leadership pieces. Never, right? It's still kind of a human grade product. We don't like, I don't know, ask AI, so what kind of PR strategy would work for this particular campaign, right? You don't. And that's why I think within public relations and communications, human aspect is so crucial, because you can't really convert, let's say, as I said, press releases into some sort of mentions that then will all of a sudden convert into, money because people are buying things. But it's, you have to tackle with a lot of different parties. Here you have a client, here you have a founder, here you have an investor, here you have someone from, media outlet, here you have someone from a podcast. And it takes a lot of, things to juggle, just to make sure there's no kind of missing point in the conversation. And as I said, like AI is here, let's use it, but never abuse it.
Yeah, that's well said, actually. Talking about you mentioning already several times wearing many hats, right? You're hands-on working with clients, you're hands-on running the business, you're hands-on spokesperson, traveling the conferences, generating leads. And like, it's one thing to go to the conference to generate lead, but when you have a stage appearance, no matter it's a panel or emceeing, well, that requires complete different energy shift and preparation. How are you?
I don't. That's what I'm saying. I don't. I'm insane and I'm proud of it. But yeah, this is interesting because recently I've been thinking about it. So I do define myself as a PR professional first, but then I'm also an agency owner. And those are very two different roles to have. So as a PR professional, it's your job, to make sure that you work with clients, you work with journalists, I don't know, you craft pitches, you come up with strategies. Yes, I may no longer be writing, all the press releases, but I read those press releases, I can edit those press releases. And it's extremely, as you said, time consuming, but just it's also very rewarding because this is something I've been doing for all these years. On the other hand, you have kind of this business owner mentality. We have bills to pay. We have a team, that's on salaries. We can't afford just not, let's say, all of a sudden to have clients because, how do you live? Then you have to make sure that the pipeline is alive. That's, like now I go to a lot of events and I speak at events. And because I want to do it from the educational point of view, once again, not from like the even business development point of view, because sometimes we get some people that want to have a conversation with us. Sometimes they don't, and that's absolutely fine. And it's like having two full-time jobs. And someone recently asked me, maybe like a couple of days ago, I was like, oh, it's so nice. Like all you do is just travel and speak and whatever. I was like, yeah, sure, just travel and speak. But also, I didn't realize that my LinkedIn is very, probably, it does give out those vibes that all I do is just travel and speak. But what no one sees is like me in the middle of the night kind of, writing those pitches or in between talks, replying to clients. And it does not mean that I'm doing both jobs kind of mediocre. I'm trying and kind of taking the pride that I'm doing everything well, right? So if I'm like with the client, that I'm with the client. If I'm just, on stage speaking with someone, that I'm on stage speaking with someone. But it's interesting because like, how do you find that balance? Because I don't want to be just an agency owner, right? I do love our clients. I love the team, I like to work with clients. Like some today, there was like so many shit shows going on, so many fires to put out, and it's stressful. And I'm like, sometimes, oh my goodness, I just want to have a nap. But on the other hand, this is what is also very exciting. So I think over the years, like nowadays, for example, if I'm going to events, I don't go to after parties. Right. If our clients are throwing events, I don't go to those parties either, because I see it as a part of a job, right? It's no longer when I was 20, like a very fun thing to do. I also started to enjoy silence because there's just so many things happening. I think I have like, I don't know, between 4 and 10 probably calls every day on top of actual, work that needs to be done, where ideally you would just be silence and, just write something creative. But I would never say, because some people are just like get burnt out and they're like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore, I hate this job. But someone asked me, like, if I would have all the money in the world, would I kind of just travel and be on stage all the time? No, actually, I would still do the same job that I'm doing right now, because as I said, the clients that we work with, I like them not only because they pay our bills. I actually really love all of them on a very personal level, and with some of them we actually became friends. And it's a very kind of unique relationship that I'm just, trying to keep up with. Yes, I would do the same thing. I would just have a lot of dogs, but that's about it.
You're on the right path, and it seems like when you speak even about that, you just thrive and your eyes are shining. And yeah, I think it's good to hear that you are just simply thriving on that. So we're getting closer to the end, unfortunately. And I have this small tradition in the podcast to leave the listeners with a thought to ponder. So what would be your question for us to ponder after we just listened such an inspiring and knowledgeable episode about PR and your career growth and your choices?
That's a really good question. I should have probably come up with like 10 questions before we jumped on a podcast. I would probably ask the question is, what would people do with their time if they would have all the time that they would ever want? Because I think time right now is the most important currency that we have, and we're really not in the position to waste it on things that we don't want to or feel pressure to.
Bingo. So, Julia, where can people follow your journey?
Well, they can follow my fake journey on LinkedIn where I travel and speak, and they can take a look at some photos of me. So yeah, do connect with me on LinkedIn. But if you are looking for PR advice, definitely go on our website, www.blackunicornpr.com. We do have a lot of blog posts. Obviously, all of them are free of charge, a lot of resources. So if you're just starting out, or if you just need a little bit more inspiration, it's all on there, literally, from how to take your photos to how not to piss off a journalist. It's all there for you, up for grabs.
Awesome. Amazing, Julia. Ladies and gentlemen, it was an episode with Julija JJ from Black Unicorn PR, long-awaited one, and I'm really glad that we made it. Thank you so much for joining and for finding time for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Julija. Thanks.
Have a great day wherever you are. Bye.
Yeah. I know no one can see that.